We're working with the pen tool, and we're trying to step things up gradually, bit by bit, and working with different features and things as we practice with the pen tool. So we're going to introduce some new features here in this current assignment, where we're going to take our name or a word, we're going to digitize it using the Rage Italic font, and we're going to smooth that work out so that all the notches that would appear in the font don't necessarily show up in our artwork. We're going to take and create compound paths which punch holes in things. We're also going to take a look at how to create masks in Illustrator. A mask is very similar to a compound path where you punch things out, but you can take, let's say, a bitmap image, maybe a texture or some kind of a photograph, and use what you've digitized to cut a hole and show the texture behind it. We'll also look at fun we can have with strokes, how we can mirror things. This is a reflection down here. We'll look at gradients, and I think that'll pretty much do it for what we're working on in this project. So let's take a look and strip this down really quickly first. Alright, so here we have the Rage Italic font. Alright, there's only one object in this layer, you can see here. If I click on it, we get the baseline. Okay, that tells us this is our anchor point. This will tell us where we're going with this. You'll notice it's kind of funky here. The distance between the C and the baseline is very different than this. I'm not sure where that comes from, but for our purposes, if we're going to lay something on a horizontal surface, we may need to adjust that. Okay, so I took and digitized right over top of the text that I have, and then you can see that I maybe adjusted that down a wee bit. Alright, so how did I just do this? I'm hitting Control and I'm clicking on the visibility icon, okay, toggling that on and off to take a look at what I have. If I want to see what's in this object here, let's make this a little bit bigger. You can change your panel options down here, and we're going to make this large so that you can see this a little more clearly. So here, our bottom object is going to be, let's get back to this, our bottom object is going to be our gradient. Okay, everything's going to rest on that. The next object is going to be our shadow, which will probably be one of the last things we actually create. We have a stroke here around the outside of our digitized word. Then we have a mask. Let's turn this off. Then we have a mask that cuts out through a texture, which we can load into there. And last but not least, on the very top, we have a black outline to punch this out a wee bit more. So let's go through step by step how we can create this and take a look at how much fun we can have digitizing with Illustrator and using the pen tool. So I'm going to minimize this down. Let's create a new document. I'm going to hit Control New. And I probably want a horizontal. So we're going to go for a landscape. Inches is always good. I like my inch designation here. CMYK, RGB, it does not matter too much for this, so we're going to hit Create. Alright. To put text into a document, come over here to the text tool or the type tool. You can click on that. Now there's two different ways you can put text in. One is you can draw a box, and this default that comes up here is called Greeking. Back in the day when I was doing graphics, you would put Greeking in if the client hadn't given you anything, because boy, they took one look at that and they'd say, we need to come up with text. So just by simply typing, you can add this text in here. We are not going to use a text box, but let me show you some of the other fun that you can have with text boxes. It's going to come to the end there. Alright, we can do all of this. If I put some spaces in, it will give me that. In our text editor, we can come up here and change the font. I can just type in the word Rage, and Rage Italic comes up automatically. I can also change the font size. Okay, if you really want a little bit more control, you can come over here to Window And you want to come down to, I guess it's type down here. Let's take a look. Type, yes, and you'll see that there is a horizontal triangle, which gives us a whole lot more. Control T will give us the palette that we need to edit the font, the size, other things like that. Paragraph is also a very useful thing where you can set justifications for your text. I'm sure you're familiar with some of these words from Word and some of the other word processing programs you might be using. So let's delete this. This is not exactly the best way for us to start because the text box is not exactly what we're going to use. You can resize this. You'll notice that down here, when you have more text flowing in your text box and you're ready for it, you'll get a red box, which tells you that something is being cropped out. You don't have enough room for all the text that you have. You can adjust this by changing your point size. And once you have everything fitting in there, things go much more easily. So here again, too much text for the box, enough text. Okay, let's delete that. Now we're going to go back to the type tool. I'm just going to click one time. Okay, now I have type that is not constrained by a box. It is just floating on that point. I'm going to type my name. I'm going to type it, spell it correctly. It's not like I haven't been doing this for 50 some years. Alright, there we go. So now we have the text. We can do a couple different things to change the size of the text. We can come down here and change it by point sizes. If that's still not big enough, because we want it as big as possible, you can hold down the Shift key and pick one of these corner boxes to transform it. Okay, so if I hold down Shift and I drag from that box, now my text is about as big as it possibly can get. Some fine point tuning things that you can do in your text editor would be if you wanted to close up the space between the C and the H. If I hold down the Alt key and press the left arrow in the bottom right corner of our keyboard, I can change what we call the kerning. Okay, I can do that here as well. Close this up. It's not going to look exactly beautiful, but since you're using a script font, you might want this all to flow a little bit nicely. Okay, the H, there's not much you can do for that, so not a big deal. I know a lot of you may have already begun this, working ahead. Do not worry about changing your kerning in between the letters. Kerning is what we're talking about here. If I come down to check my kerning, I can click on my type tool, which would also be Control T, right? And if I click here, notice this is where we're talking about kerning. This is the setting that it can change. So if I click in between here, and that's not showing me the kerning. Here we go. This is the kerning. This is the horizontal. This is the tracking. Sorry. So here it says -100. That means I've closed things up. So if I click here, notice that it changed back to 0. All right. Here -120. Here we're doing well. We got 0. All right. You can also change your tracking if you wanted to. Make this wider. Let's take a look here, and we can change this to 100. And that's not really going to do a whole lot for us, right? So let's pull that back to 0. All right. And now we've got something that's working reasonably well. I'm going to just tweak this a wee bit more there. Okay. So now we're done with our fonts. So that is the type tool. We went over point sizes, how to change the name of the font, and there are different places that we can do this, all right, depending on what you're looking for. If you need more control, you can get this palette up by hitting Control T or finding it here under type and going for character. Okay, you'll notice it says character right there. So here we have control over our kerning, which is this window right here. This would be our tracking, or how we're going to change that. this, if we change this, this is probably going to be much more likely. This is more of a horizontal scale. There we go. So you can change it there as well. You get different features, different effects depending on where you're doing this. You can rotate your text from this tool too. Okay, that's rotating every single letter. What the purpose for that would be, don't know, but if you find a use for it, please let me know. We have a baseline shift and other things down here, which we're not going to get into right now. These are some automatic features where if we had a superscript or a subscript or an underline, we can set those in. I'm sure you've seen these kind of things in some of your other word processing programs. So enough of this for right now. Let's stop this video. It's gone on long enough, and we'll come back in a minute and we'll work some more with layers and start using the pen tool.